Okay, so I'm going to do a series of quick-fire revision videos to help you with the literature texts. This one's going to look at the main characters from Of Mice and Men and point out what you need to be thinking about in terms of understanding these characters and how they fit into the novella as a whole. What we'd always start off with any text, whether we're thinking about themes or techniques or characters as we are here, is think about what is the central message of the text. And I always try and get my students to sum it up in a sentence and have this underpinning all their revision. So as I would understand it, or my perspective of the novella, is that it is a social commentary. So John Steinbeck was writing the story, writing a fictional account about society at the time and how life in America in the 1930s was actually quite hard. Now for the AQA exam, you really do need to have a good understanding of the context of the novel, because part of the question will ask you to write about the novel in its context. So knowing about the Great Depression, the American Dream, the Dust Bowl, migrant workers, segregation at the time is really important, because that actually is what John Steinbeck was writing about. That's why he wrote the novella. So thinking about the characters, I've got two columns here. We've got main on one side and subordinate. Okay, so the main characters, you might immediately think of George Milton and Lennie Small, but even some of the characters which don't appear in the novel as often, so Candy, Curley's wife and Crooks, I would still consider them to be main characters. And the reason why is because I think John Steinbeck is using these characters to put across his central message. Through those characters, he's showing how hard it was for them in the 1930s and who they represent. So these 5 characters, they're not just individuals, but they're representative of certain types of people. Then subordinates. Okay, so these are the characters that support within the novella, and we have Slim, Curley and Carlton. There are others. There's the boss, there's Wit, other characters are referred to, so Aunt Clara, etc, etc. But for this video, I'm just going to be looking at the main characters, so the 5 on the left hand side there. So first of all, George Milton. Well, he's short-tempered, he's quite curt and abrupt. However, he is also honest, conscientious and loyal. He's very protective of Lennie, and this may be why he's short-tempered, because he's continually having to look after Lennie, and his frustrations are borne out in his temper. I think that he probably feels quite bound to Lennie because of his guilt from teasing Lennie when he was younger. I think that's quite evident when he talks about how he teased Lennie. His name, Georgios, is Greek, means earth worker, so it represents him as one of those ranch workers. Now his surname, some people think this is a bit tenuous, but immediately when I hear of Milton, I think about the poet John Milton, who wrote the epic poem Paradise Lost, which is about the fall of paradise, so the fall of man, Adam and Eve being cast out of the Garden of Eden. And I kind of think that is some link to the lost dream within the novella. So this dream of a farm, which is their paradise, George and Lennie's paradise, which inevitably is lost at the end of the story. He has simple pleasures, which is shown in his dream, the dream of owning their own land, self-sufficiency, which essentially is the American dream, and he's an idealist in that dream. He, at the end, as you know, because you would have read the book, and this is revision, he kills Lennie, and this is seen to be an act of mercy. It stops that kind of cycle that they're in, and it's an act of self-sacrifice, because by killing Lennie, the dream also dies and becomes unobtainable. So Lennie, he has learning disabilities, mentally handicapped, and as a result, he has an even more simplistic and innocent outlook on life. He's like a big child in the way that he looks at things. Now, this is contrasted with his physicality. He is shown to be exceptionally strong, and as I said, this contrasts with his childlike emotions. His name, Leonard. Lennie is short for Leonard, and this comes from the Old German Löwenhart. I think that's how you pronounce it, Löwenhart, I suppose, which means as strong as a lion, the heart of a lion. And then, of course, his surname is an ironic reference to his size. Lennie is absolutely central to the tragedy. We see that he's doomed from the start, and everything Steinbeck writes in such a way that we know what's going to happen. We see where they're coming from at the start, from the girl in weed, the crushing of the mouse, and all of his actions foreshadow. In other words, they predict what's going to come, and it kind of directs the narrative, directs the story. He's described throughout in animalistic terms, and this emphasizes his simple, primal and instinctual nature. Okay, so he drinks by just dunking his head straight into the water. He's described in terms of like a bear with having paws. Again, making that connection with him having more instinctual, an instinctual nature. His simplicity, because of his learning disability, it is endearing, but this is also at odds with the world in which he lives. This is shown in complete contrast to the world around him. And the innocence of his dream, the purity of just having the farm and having the rabbits, this is undermined by his disability, I think. In other words, I think what Steinbeck is saying, this is the dream of a simple person. In other words, it's not possible. It's not a reasonable view of the world. Candy. Now, Candy doesn't just represent one person. He represents the elderly and how they become a forgotten generation, particularly in the 1930s, when there wasn't any welfare states for them, as we have over here. No state pensions for them. He has an injury, so his hand, he's got a stump, and this is shown to be the inevitable byproduct. In other words, just what will happen to you if you have a life of complete physical labour. He is excluded, he is alone, he is isolated because of his age and because of his disability, and he seeks solace with his dog. And of course, we see halfway through the novel that he loses his dog as well. And of course, this quite emotionally charged moment of the shooting of the dog, Candy sees that this is foreshadowing his own life. He can see that he has outlived his use. Look at the way he describes the dog when the dog was younger, and that he was shown. He describes with pride that the dog was a great sheepdog, and we kind of get a sense that Candy was a great worker in his youth. I like to think of Candy as an older George. So we can kind of see where George is going with this. He will eventually get too old to work, and then will get cast to the side. He is entirely devoted to the dream, perhaps because of his desperation and also because of his naivety. It's the only thing he clings on to. When I look at the theme of dreams in another video, we talk about how they're used as a form of escape by the characters. In other words, this way of like planning what you're going to do if you win the lottery. It's a way of escaping from the world in which you live. Curley's wife, fascinating character, I think. She is the only female character. Yes, Aunt Clara is referred to, but she is the only female character in the novella. We never see her name. We never know her name. She's only referred to as belonging to Curley, Curley's wife. So she's kind of objectified. She's treated as a possession, and this shows a lack of identity. Initially, she is viewed as being manipulative and dangerous. George refers to her as being a tramp and as jailbait, and she's linked with the colour red. Look at how many times the word or the colour red is in various forms: rouged lips, red mules, in the first paragraph to describe her. This emphasises that passion, but also danger and incongruity. Incongruity means when you stand out. She is, being the only woman and dressed in red, means she really stands out on the ranch. Now that's her initial presentation, but as we go on, we see that actually she's quite insecure and she's lonely. Her makeup, she's caked in makeup. This kind of is a mask, a kind of protection. She seeks attention because she is essentially in a loveless marriage. Curley, she's his trophy wife, and there's not really any genuine affection between the two. I mean, she refers in section 5, I think, that Curley ain't a nice fella, or whatever the quote is. You can look that up yourself. But we see that she is a lonely person. And Crooks, like Curley's wife, he is also not named. He is nicknamed, and therefore, like Curley's wife, he is also denied an identity and a voice in society. Most of the ranch workers, even Candy, who is essentially a nice guy, but Candy in section 2, within one paragraph, refers to Crooks, I think about 5 times, in using quite strong and shocking racist terminology. Steinbeck himself is not kind of condoning this, and he's not necessarily criticising Candy, but it's just highlighting how, through shock, that Crooks, this person, is just referred to in these hugely insulting terms. Because of the racial discrimination, he is isolated, he is alone, he sleeps on his own, and because of that, he's proud, he's dignified, and he's also well read and completely aware of his legal rights. He had to be, in those days, aware of his legal rights. And because of the way that he has been treated through this segregation and discrimination, he is incredibly cynical of the world, and very suspicious of people. Whilst it's clear that he's not happy being isolated from the others, he feels protected in that isolation, and he does try to keep himself separate, because as far as he sees it, that's the safest way to be.